Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Good morning. The scripture today is from John chapter 15, verses 12 through 17. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you might go and bear fruit that will last. And so that wherever you ask in my name, the Father will give to you. This is my command: love each other. May God add his blessing to the reading.
Today's a wonderful day. Wonderful because it's Father's Day for starters. Happy Father's Day to all the guys here in the room and joining us online. But part of what makes today so beautiful is that 75 members of our church today got to find out what child chose them in Aguacatan, Guatemala. And I'm so excited about this. I acknowledged last week when we gave the pitch, to sign up to be sponsors in Guatemala. I made this goal that was twice that number, 150 families or 150 children that are sponsored. And so you might be thinking, Dave, we only got halfway there. Well, part of the problem is that I dream way too big as a pastor sometimes, talking with our friends at World Vision, they're like, actually, Dave, because I was worried we were disappointing them, falling way short of expectations. And they said, actually, Dave, you are right where we thought you would be based on the size and attendance of your church. And so I was like, wow, great. If you're happy, then I'm happy. And so I don't want you to feel at all like, wah, we only hit half our goal. Instead, I want to celebrate how amazing it is. 75 children in Aguacatan, Guatemala on Tuesday morning were led by their parents to the school. And then they entered a room in the school, in the mountain village there, and they saw our pictures displayed on a wall, and one by one, they each chose one of us to be their friends. How amazing and how beautiful is that? Now, if you're sitting here and you're saying, I don't know what you're talking about, Pastor Dave. I missed this thing entirely. That's all right, because later on at the end of the message, I will share with you an opportunity that you can still be part of what I'm talking about. But I just, for a moment, want to reflect with you about the power of choice. When we started this 3 weeks ago with the Matthew 25 challenge, there was 170 families in our church that agreed to be part of the Matthew 25 challenge, 130 children through our vacation Bible school alone. And so those families and households and individuals, what they did is throughout the week, they committed to giving something up. Sleeping on the floor, skipping a meal, drinking only water, challenges like this every day in order to more deeply understand and empathize with the needs of the least of these throughout our world. And each day we were sent videos to kind of share with us stories about children in other parts of the world. But the first video every morning was kind of an explanation of the challenge that we faced. And I don't know if you've noticed the title of those videos on your phone. The title of them always had the word choice in there: the choice of food, the choice of water, the choice of shelter. And that word choice just kept striking me. That as we were choosing to go without, there were people in our world who didn't have that choice available to them. This was just their reality that they had no choice to live with. And I began thinking about just the power of choice, and I thought, it's incredible because the gift of choice, the power of choice, it's God-given. I mean, it's wired right into us as human beings. In the very beginning, the first man and woman created, Adam and Eve, when God created them and set them in the garden, what did he give them? He gave them, yes, a limit, but he also gave them liberty. He gave them a choice about whether they would choose to obey or disobey. It's hardwired into us as human beings. Author Andy Crouch, reflecting on the story of Genesis chapters 1 and 2, says this is what makes us unique. Part of what it means to be made in God's image. That apart from all the other creatures that God created, he gave us the power to participate in the stuff-making, sense-making process that is the most distinctive things that we human beings do. Out of all the creatures God created, we get to make something out of our lives and make something out of the world around us. This is the gift and the power of choice. And whenever choice is present, human dignity is affirmed. And whenever choice is taken away, something of our humanity is stripped away. I thought about authors that we've had, or speakers we've had here at our church, like Eva Kor. And Eva Kor, if you know her story, she lived through German concentration camps. She lived in a condition, in a system that was set out to systematically strip people of their humanity and their dignity. And yet Eva affirmed that they had choices, and in that choice was their dignity, even the choice to forgive her captors and her prisoners. And in those choices, I mean, she wasn't very sentimental about forgiveness. She said it was a choice. It was a way of affirming the ownership of our own soul, that no one got to take that away from us. Her words reminded me of the words of Viktor Frankl in The Search for Man's Meaning. Viktor Frankl wrote out of the experience of being in concentration camps, and he said, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Just about anything can be taken from us, he said, except the power to choose. It's something essential to our humanity and our dignity. I guess what I want you to reflect on for a moment is that God gives each and every one the power of choice. We get to choose things all the time. It's hardwired into who we are as human beings, and where choice is present, human beings flourish. However, the challenge that we have to face with in this whole series we've been talking about is that while God gives choice universally, society does not distribute it equally to all. This is one of the crushing things of poverty, the way it strips and takes away choice from people. And it's tough sometimes for us to kind of recognize what this is like, because we live in a world where we have so many choices that we take them for granted. Sometimes you have to get out of the context in order to appreciate the amount of choices we have as Americans. I know for Jamelin and I, that was part of our experience when we lived in Haiti. We were there, I remember the first time we came home after being in Haiti 6 months. And I remember going to the restaurant. We went to a Chili's in the airport, you know what I mean? And we sat down at the restaurant, and I remember the experience of the menu being placed in front of us and having the opportunity to order our food versus just accepting whatever was placed in front of us. First time we went to a supermarket was crazy and overwhelming. I remember we went in the store and we had a long list of stuff that we needed to get. And so Jamie and I said, well, we'll just split up. I took half the list, she took half the list. It was a terrible strategy, but we didn't quite realize it at the time. I went, got everything on my list, and I got back to the checkout registers where we were supposed to meet up. And I waited for a while, and no Jamelin, I didn't see her. I finally got concerned, and I started looking through the store trying to find her. I found her standing in the toothpaste aisle, just looking at the shelves, completely, this is a true story, you can ask her, completely overwhelmed with the amount of choices that were available just to brush your teeth. And if we were this overwhelmed after 6 months, imagine the life of those who've gone their whole lives without the kinds of choices that you and I take for granted every day. When we were in the orphanage, that was one of the places that Jamila and I worked a lot in Haiti, was the orphanage there in Fondois that had about 45 children ages 3 to 20. One of the questions that we had to unlearn was the question of asking children, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because that's what we do here in America with children, right? That's our way of encouraging their dreams. We get down on their level and say, what do you want to be someday? When we had a preschool graduation here on these steps just a handful of weeks ago, it was a great, celebration of all these children that have been kind of growing up in our church. And each one came forward when their name was called, and they got a little medal and a diploma. And then the teacher shared with the crowd, here's what little Billy or little Sally wants to be someday. And you got to hear all these kids' dreams, that they want to be professors and scientists and teachers and astronauts. And I remember there's one little classroom that there's a bunch of boys that they had to get together to answer this question because they all had the same answer. They all wanted to be policeman pilots, the guy who gets to fly the helicopter, the police helicopter. Like they all wanted to be that guy, right? And it was as crazy as that sounds, and as much as I enjoyed hearing all these children's dreams, I reflected, in Haiti, we learned not to ask that question. Because you would ask, what do you want to be someday? And they didn't know how to answer it. Because children in Haiti are not told from an early age, you can be anything you dreamed. You can do anything you want in life. They're not given those choices. And so you don't even promise them at an early age. And I tell you this because I want you to understand how profound it is that when we chose to sponsor children in Aguacatan, Guatemala, we put the power of choice in their hands. We didn't go out in the hallway and pick their picture and then send them word that some random American 1,000 miles away chose them to sponsor them. Instead, they got to look at our pictures and they got to see who they felt connected to, and they got to choose us to be their friends. From the very beginning, we gave them the power and dignity of choice. So much of charity work fails because it deprives people of real agency. It just creates dependency. It keeps them from making meaningful decisions and taking responsibility for their own lives. If you want to do development work, it's not just enough to give people resources. You have to give them agency. You have to give them dignity. You have to give them the possibility of making choices and taking responsibility for their own lives. I'll give you an example domestically. We do a lot of work with Habitat for Humanity. And what makes Habitat so powerful is not just that they're in the business of giving out homes. It's the work they do with homeowners, that homeowners go through a long process of training and preparation, and they save up money to pay, a portion of the cost, and they put in sweat equity of hours working not just on their own home, but on other people's homes, so that by the time they get a home, they don't just get this gift of a home, but they also get the pride of knowing they did something meaningful, that they earned this. Reggie Joyner says, people never feel significant until you give them something significant to do. And so in some small way, we gave a child significance because we let a child choose us. And this is, I hope, the first of many, many, many choices that we hope to empower. Because our funds, given monthly, bundled together, World Vision will put those to work to address root causes of poverty, education, nutrition, clean water, healthcare, agriculture, economic development. Like they're going to invest in this community and in those children with the hope that someday they will be able to make even more powerful choices with their lives. Because of the development work that we are doing with World Vision, someday, these children that we're sponsoring, whose pictures we're looking at in these pictures, someday they might have the ability to look beyond the horizon of their current circumstances and see a better world and see a better future and make a choice about the kind of person God wants them to be to make a difference in the world. Those are the choices that we are empowering by God's grace. As my brother-in-law Josh said last week, as followers of Jesus, we're cultivating lives that affirm the dignity of every person and restore brokenness in the world. That's what God is doing in and through us through this opportunity, and I celebrate it. So as we think about the power of choice, though, today we have the experience, or at least some of us have had the experience, of being chosen. And I want to kind of consider the other side of the coin as well. Because when we think about being chosen, I think there's a blessing in that as well. And I think about the words of Jesus. And the last night that he gathered with his disciples, he had so much that he wanted to convey to them. And John in particular, we have this long passage beginning in John 13 to John 17 of everything that Jesus, his last words to all of his disciples. And there, smack dab in the middle of it, was the passage that Mary read just a moment ago. And in that passage, Jesus says to them, "You did not choose me, but I chose you." Now, what is Jesus saying here? You didn't choose me, but I chose you. I could imagine some of the disciples saying, "Hey, wait a second, I had a part in this. Like, I had to say yes, I chose you. I could have chosen to stay home. I could have chosen to be married. I could have chosen to settle down somewhere." Yes, the disciples had agency in all those decisions, but Jesus wants them to understand, before you chose me, first I chose you. I called you. Long before you ever thought of following me, my eye was on you. I chose you. Jesus isn't negating the power of choice. Instead, he's wanting his disciples to experience the blessing of being chosen. Can you think of a time in your life where you experienced what it was like to be chosen? I mean, maybe you go all the way back to like when you're a kid on the playground. You know how it was, you're dividing into teams, there's two captains that are chosen, they're maybe you were the ones who was the captain that got to choose. I never was, I was never that good, But you remember, you'd all line up in front of the captains, and one by one they would point and they'd say, "I choose you, I choose you, I choose you to be on my team." Or maybe you remember what middle school dances were like. I don't know what they were like for all of you, but when I was growing up, middle school dances were like some kind of purgatory, like some threshold of hell, Like you go in and all the boys would line up on one end and all the girls, like we had dates, but as soon as we got in the room, we split, right? And the girls would all go to the other side and we would skate in our little clusters. And we were perfectly fine with that until the DJ would play a slow dance song, right? And the slow dance song meant that you had to go find someone to dance with. And you dance, arms out like this, but you would dance it. And I remember the feeling, maybe you do too, of sitting there wondering, and you're seeing all these people coupling up, and you're wondering, am I going to dance with someone? Is anyone going to want me? And then someone says, "Will you dance with me?" And you're chosen. Or maybe you remember applying for your college, or applying for your first job, or applying for promotion or an opportunity, and what it's like when you're applying, especially if you can see all the other applicants, because we all kind of compare our insides to their outsides, and we see them and their competence and their swagger, and we think, well, they are so much more capable and suited for this job, I'll never get picked. And then you get the letter, or you get the handshake that says, "You're in. I chose you to be part of this institution or this job or this career." It's an amazing feeling to get chosen for something. And I think Jesus wants his disciples to know, it's not just that you chose me, but I chose you. And maybe he wants the same knowledge for us as well. I mean, to be chosen means a handful of things at least. I think the fact that we were chosen tells us we have value. Because if we're chosen, that means there's something inside of us worth choosing. To the Colossians, Paul writes at one point, he says, therefore, as God's chosen ones, holy and dearly loved, let those words sink down in your soul. As God's chosen one, you are holy and dearly loved. There is something in you that God said has value. You're chosen. To be chosen means that you also have purpose. Not just value, but purpose. God chooses us for a reason. He wants us to be on his team in order to contribute something. To the disciples, as soon as he spoke those words, I chose you, he said, and I appointed you. Why? To bear fruit. That is our purpose. Every single one of us is to bear fruit. And there is some fruit that you bear. There is some gift that you bring to God's team that no one else in the sanctuary, no one else in our church can bring. You have a purpose and a plan because God chose you. And lastly, to be chosen, it means that we have security because we're not unchosen. We're not randomly floating around the universe, but we are chosen by God and we belong to him. To the Ephesians, Paul writes, he says, before the foundations of the world were laid, God chose you by name. He said, you. I want you. And he predestined us to be adopted as his children. How powerful is that? I know there's a lot of times we think about chosenness, and there are theological questions that come up. I mean, maybe you're already thinking them. Like if God chooses us, then, well, what about all the people that don't follow Jesus? Are they not chosen? And if God chooses us, then what does that mean about human agency and human dignity and human responsibility and accountability? Everything that you started off talking about, Dave. What if God does all the choosing, what's our role in all this? And those are legitimate questions that great scholars have wrestled with. I lean towards, I love how John Wesley kind of thought about these questions, the founder of the Methodist movement, John Wesley. He debated vigorously with all the religious leaders of his day, George Whitefield and other leaders of the church, specifically about these questions that we often think about in terms of predestination versus free will. Like, does God do all the choosing or do we get choice? And Wesley kind of, he tried to chart this middle way between the two. He didn't like predestination at all. Like he was not in favor of God doing all the choosing because he said there has to be human accountability. There has to be human responsibility. But he agreed that free will is a dead-end argument because given all the choices we can, most often like Adam and Eve, we make the wrong choice. He said, so he didn't talk about free will very much, but what he did talk about was free grace. That's the way he framed the argument, free grace. He said, the grace, the love of God, whence cometh our salvation, is free in all and free for all. God's love, exemplified and let loose in the world through his son, Jesus Christ, is available to every single man, woman, and child that walks the earth. And moreover, he said, that through the gift of his son and the work of his spirit, God enables us to say yes back to him. Left to our own devices, we couldn't do it. But through God's spirit, God gives us the capacity to say yes, to choose him, to choose an abundant way of life that is available through his son. I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make a parallel, if you will, between what has happened this week between us and a community in Guatemala, and what God is still doing right now in us and among us and through us. Last week, 75 people said yes to a child in Guatemala. And then through the work of World Vision, those 75 children, whom we didn't know, had the chance to say yes in response. One by one, they chose us and said yes. And in that mutual yes, there's relationship, and there's love, and there's blessing. And maybe in the same way, we can think of it this way, that long before the foundations of the world were laid, God chose us. And left to our own devices, we're not able to say yes. We weren't able to choose God. no more than the children in Guatemala without World Vision could choose us. No, God had to create a way, a pathway for us to respond to his love, which he did through his son, Christ Jesus. And when through his son, we know and understand his love and we say yes in return, in that mutual yes, there is life and blessing and love and salvation. And when we say yes to Jesus, his love abounds. When we say yes to his call on our life, when we say yes to the least of these, when we say yes to the ministry that he is doing in our midst and in Guatemala and all over the world, in all those places, when we say yes to God, there is life and blessing and hope and peace and love and salvation abound. It's a beautiful thing that we've gotten to be part of. And just to remind you of what took place this week, I want to share one last video from World Vision. Take a look.
You allowed love and light to invade the darkness, and heaven came to earth. Sponsorship is such a beautiful program, but it has always been in the hands of the sponsor. The decision and the choice has always been in the sponsor choosing the child and said, no, we're going to put the choice into the hands of a child. This is what the gospel looks like. You put the motion of choice into the hands of a child. You lived out the power of the gospel of God as you put the empowerment and the choice into the hands of a child.
I can never forget those beautiful eyes going over right and left, looking for people they wanted as their friend. Chosen is truly amazing ministry.
Coming not as the one who's going to save them, but as the one who's going to learn from them and to serve them.
And my prayer is that your heart is stirred by God today to step into a relationship with a child, and that relationship changes everything.
I love that video. I love the image of those children's eyes scanning the pictures, their smiles when they point, and they make a choice. How beautiful is that? Can we just take a moment and applaud those who are part of the Chosen program this week and say thank you for... So if you were chosen this week, there's a line of envelopes on a wall. Some of you I know have already found out what child chose you. If you haven't done so already, you can go after worship and just go to the envelopes and find your name, and you'll find out what child chose you. If those of you who are online, you can, at noon today, you'll receive an email from World Vision that will have the same picture and information of the child that chose you to be their sponsor. And if you're here today and you think, I've missed the boat, I'm not getting the choice because I wasn't here last week or whatever, I want to let you know the choice is still yours. You can still be part of Chosen if you so desire. The way it works is this: you just pull out a phone and you text the letters ZUMC to that number, 56170. You can do it right now. I won't be offended if you pull out your phone and text in the middle of church. You can text ZUMC 56170. And when you do so, you'll get a reply message that'll ask you to fill out some information. And then after you fill out that information, you can step out into our lobby area where we have volunteers set up who will guide you through the rest of the process and help you take an epic family photo or individual photo that we can send to Guatemala. And then if you're online, you can do the exact same thing, except instead of stepping out into the lobby, you can just upload your own epic selfie be. And here's the really cool part, is that all of these pictures that we collect today, as well as those who signed up this past week, we had a number of people who signed up, but after the 9 p.m. deadline, all of them would be taken together to Guacatan, Guatemala in 2 weeks from now. There will be, or a week from now, there will be a second choosing party. And so if you missed out on it, that's okay. There's going to be a second party. You can still be part of it. In 2 weeks, you will find out what child chose you. And so, yes, we didn't hit our goal of 150, but I don't care. If you feel God nudging you, prompting you to be part of this opportunity, I hope you'll respond to that call, because when we say yes to God, His blessings abound in our life. Now, we're going to close this with a song that the band is going to share with us, that Frank and the band are going to share with us. And I love this song, and I love the video that goes with it, because it tells the story of the last 3 weeks, but I think it gives us a picture of what God's restoration and God's salvation is all about. And I want you to remember, whether or not you sign up to sponsor a child in Guatemala, I want you to remember that you were chosen. Every single one of you, every single one of us. God chose us, predestined us for adoption, called us His sons and His daughters. And He appoints us to bear His fruit, to bear fruit that will last. Whether that's by sharing love with a child in Guatemala or sharing love closer to home, He calls us to be part of the working out of His salvation, His grace, His mercy, His restoration of the world. And what a blessing, what an honor it is to be part of it. So let's say yes.
All my pain, I wonder if I'll ever find my way. I wonder if my life could really change at all. All the earth, could all that is lost ever be found? Could a garden come up from this ground at all? You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of dust. You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of us. All around, hope is springing up from the soul ground. Out of chaos, life is being found in you. You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of dust. You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of us.